If you're a woman who struggles with self-worth, finds herself attracted to emotionally unavailable partners, or constantly seeks validation from others, the root of your pain might not be what you think it is. Carl Jung discovered something revolutionary about family psychology that most people never realize. The wounds you carry aren't just from what your narcissistic father did to you. They're from the unhealed trauma he inherited and unconsciously passed down through generations. Today, we're going to explore the hidden psychological legacy that narcissistic fathers leave behind, and why understanding Jung's insights about generational trauma is the key to breaking cycles that have been destroying women's lives for decades. This isn't just another video about toxic fathers. This is about understanding the invisible wounds that shape your entire relationship with yourself and others. Carl Jung understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to grasp. Narcissism in fathers isn't born in a vacuum. It's the manifestation of what he called unlived life, the parts of themselves they rejected, suppressed, or never developed. When a father operates from narcissistic patterns, he's not just being selfish or cruel. He's unconsciously acting out the unresolved trauma of his own childhood, his father's childhood, and potentially generations of emotional wounds. Jung called this phenomenon the sins of the fathers being visited upon the children. But he didn't mean this in a religious sense. He meant it psychologically. The emotional patterns, the wounded parts, the unlived potential of our ancestors gets passed down through the family system like a psychological inheritance we never asked for. For daughters of narcissistic fathers, this creates what Jung termed the wounded feminine. You inherit not just your father's inability to see and value you as you are, but also his unconscious relationship with the feminine principle itself. If your father's own relationship with the feminine was wounded, perhaps through his own mother's emotional unavailability or his father's rejection of emotional expression, then his capacity to nurture, validate, and celebrate his daughter becomes severely compromised. If this is already hitting home for you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We explore deep Jungian psychology for women's healing every week, helping you understand and transform generational patterns that have been holding you back. The tragedy is that narcissistic fathers often desperately want to love their daughters, but they're psychologically incapable of loving anything they can't control or possess. They see their daughters as extensions of themselves, rather than separate individuals with their own souls and destinies. This creates a fundamental wound in a woman's psyche. She learns that love is conditional, that her worth depends on meeting someone else's needs, and that her authentic self is somehow unacceptable. The psychological legacy of a narcissistic father doesn't end when you move out of his house. Jung understood that these early relational patterns become what he called complexes, autonomous psychological structures that operate independently of your conscious will. These complexes shape every relationship you have, especially with men, often in ways you don't even realize. One of the most devastating patterns Jung identified is what happens to a woman's animus, her inner masculine principle. In healthy development, the animus represents your ability to think clearly, set boundaries, pursue goals, and stand up for yourself. But when your primary model of masculinity was narcissistic, controlling, and emotionally unavailable, your animus becomes contaminated with these same qualities. This shows up in adult relationships in heartbreaking ways. You might find yourself attracted to men who are emotionally distant, critical, or self-centered, not because you consciously want to be hurt, but because these patterns feel familiar to your unconscious mind. Your psyche mistakes familiarity for love and comfort for chemistry. Many women with narcissistic fathers develop what Jung called father hunger, an insatiable need for male validation and approval. You might achieve incredible success professionally, but still feel empty inside because no external achievement can fill the void left by a father who couldn't see your true worth. You become addicted to male attention, But paradoxically, you don't trust it when you receive it because your father taught you that love always comes with conditions and manipulation. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of this psychological inheritance is how your father's critical voice becomes internalized as what Jung called the negative animus. This isn't just low self-esteem. It's having an internal psychological structure that constantly judges, criticizes, and invalidates your thoughts, feelings, and desires. This inner critic often sounds exactly like your father. It tells you that you're too sensitive, too demanding, too much. It questions your perceptions and makes you doubt your own reality. It convinces you that your needs are unreasonable and your emotions are inconvenient. This is your father's narcissistic worldview living inside your own mind, continuing to wound you long after you physically escaped his influence. Women with this pattern often struggle with what Jung called psychological possession. You become possessed by this critical voice, believing it's your own thoughts, rather than recognizing it as an internalized version of your father's unhealed trauma. You might find yourself in constant internal battles, never feeling good enough, never trusting your own judgment, never believing you deserve genuine love and respect. The tragic irony is that the very sensitivity and emotional depth your father criticized you for are actually your greatest strengths. Jung understood that women's capacity for feeling, intuition, and emotional intelligence are not weaknesses to be suppressed, but gifts to be cultivated and honored. Your father's inability to appreciate these qualities says nothing about their value and everything about his own emotional limitations. The relationship with your own feminine power becomes one of the most complex casualties of having a narcissistic father. Jung understood that the feminine principle represents receptivity, intuition, emotional depth, and the capacity for relationship and nurturing. When your father couldn't honor or celebrate these qualities in you, you learned to reject them in yourself. This creates what Jung called identification with the animus. You become overly identified with masculine qualities like logic, control, and achievement while rejecting your feminine nature. You might pride yourself on being low maintenance, not like other women, or more logical than emotional. But this isn't empowerment. It's self-abandonment disguised as strength. Many daughters of narcissistic fathers become high achievers, believing that if they can just accomplish enough, produce enough, or prove themselves enough, they'll finally earn the love and recognition they never received. But achievement becomes a prison because it's motivated by the wound rather than authentic desire. You're trying to heal a little girl's heart with an adult woman's accomplishments, and it never works. Jung recognized that true healing requires what he called holding the tension of the opposites. You can't heal by rejecting either your masculine or feminine nature. You need to integrate both, developing healthy masculine qualities like boundaries and self-advocacy, while also reclaiming and honoring your feminine gifts of intuition, emotional intelligence, and relational wisdom. The generational pattern becomes clear when you understand that your narcissistic father was likely raised by parents who couldn't model healthy emotional expression or authentic intimacy. His father may have been absent, critical, or emotionally shut down. His mother may have been codependent, overwhelmed, or unable to provide consistent emotional attunement. Your father's narcissism isn't evil. It's a psychological defense system that developed to protect a wounded child who never learned how to have genuine relationships. But here's where it gets complicated. Understanding your father's trauma doesn't mean excusing his behavior or minimizing its impact on you. Jung was clear that compassion for someone's wounds doesn't require accepting their harmful actions. You can understand that your father was wounded while also fully acknowledging that his wounds wounded you. The most profound realization in this healing journey is recognizing that you have the power to break this generational cycle. Jung called this process making the unconscious conscious. When you understand the psychological patterns that have been passed down through your family line, you can choose to heal them rather than pass them on. This means doing the inner work your father couldn't or wouldn't do. It means learning to validate your own emotions instead of dismissing them. It means developing the capacity for healthy relationships that your father never modeled. It means becoming the emotionally available, authentic, and whole person that you needed him to be. The path to healing from a narcissistic father's psychological legacy isn't about forgetting your past or pretending the wounds don't exist. Jung called this healing process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are, separate from the projections, expectations, and wounds of others. For daughters of narcissistic fathers, this process requires specific psychological work that goes far deeper than conventional therapy approaches. The first crucial step is what Jung called withdrawing projections. You must learn to distinguish between your authentic thoughts and feelings versus the internalized voice of your father's criticism. This means developing what Jung termed the observing ego, a part of yourself that can witness your internal dialogue without being consumed by it. When that familiar critical voice starts telling you that you're too much, too sensitive, or not good enough, you learn to respond with curiosity rather than belief. You ask, whose voice is this really? What would I think about myself if I had never heard these criticisms? The second essential element is reclaiming your relationship with your own emotions. Narcissistic fathers teach their daughters that emotions are inconvenient, manipulative, or signs of weakness. But Jung understood that emotions are the language of the soul. They contain vital information about your needs, boundaries, and authentic desires. Healing means learning to feel your feelings fully without needing to justify them to anyone, including yourself. This emotional reclamation often involves grieving the father you never had while learning to become a good parent to yourself. Jung recognized that we all carry internal parent figures, representations of how we were parented, that continue to influence our self-treatment as adults. If your internal father is critical, dismissive, or controlling, you must consciously develop an internal loving parent who can provide the validation, encouragement, and unconditional acceptance you never received. Jung also emphasized the importance of developing what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox and complexity without needing to resolve everything into black and white categories. This means learning to hold compassion for your father's wounds while also maintaining clear boundaries about his behavior. It means accepting that you can love someone who harmed you without excusing or minimizing that harm. The shadow work involved in this healing is particularly challenging because it requires facing the ways you've internalized your father's patterns. You might discover that you've become critical of other women, dismissive of emotional expression, or controlling in your own relationships. Jung called this meeting your shadow, acknowledging the parts of yourself that you'd rather not see. But this shadow work is essential because you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. Perhaps most importantly, healing requires developing genuine self-compassion. This isn't positive thinking or affirmations. It's the deep cellular knowing that you are worthy of love simply because you exist. It's learning to treat yourself with the kindness you would show a beloved friend, especially when you're struggling or imperfect. When you begin to heal from your narcissistic father's psychological legacy, the transformation shows up most dramatically in your relationships. Jung understood that we unconsciously recreate our early relational patterns until we make them conscious and choose differently. As you do this inner work, you'll notice profound shifts in how you relate to others and how others relate to you. One of the first changes you'll experience is what Jung called the development of authentic boundaries. Instead of the rigid walls you may have built to protect yourself, or the complete absence of boundaries that left you vulnerable to manipulation, you develop flexible, conscious boundaries based on your actual needs and values. You stop explaining or justifying these boundaries to others because you understand they're not up for negotiation. Your relationship patterns with men will transform dramatically. Instead of being unconsciously drawn to emotionally unavailable, critical, or narcissistic partners who recreate your father's dynamic, you'll find yourself naturally attracted to men who are emotionally mature, consistent, and capable of genuine intimacy. This isn't about changing your type. It's about healing the psychological wounds that made unhealthy dynamics feel like love. Jung observed that as women heal their father wounds, they stop seeking external validation and start developing what he called inner authority. You begin trusting your own perceptions, honoring your own needs, and making decisions based on your authentic values rather than what others expect or approve of. This inner authority isn't aggressive or defensive. It's calm, grounded, and unshakable. Your relationship with other women also transforms as you heal. Many daughters of narcissistic fathers struggle with female friendships because they've learned to compete for male attention and validation. As you develop your own inner worth, you stop seeing other women as competition and start seeing them as allies and mirrors for your own healing journey. Perhaps most importantly, you develop the capacity for what Jung called conscious parenting. Whether you have children or not, this means you become aware of your own psychological patterns and triggers, so you don't unconsciously pass them on. You learn to regulate your own emotions rather than expecting others to manage them for you. You develop the emotional availability and consistency that you never received. The signs that you're breaking free from your father's psychological legacy are subtle but profound. You stop overachieving to prove your worth and start pursuing goals that genuinely fulfill you. You stop explaining yourself to people who haven't earned the right to understand you. You develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the inner knowing that you belong to yourself, not to anyone else's expectations or demands. If this content is helping you understand and heal your own patterns, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We're committed to bringing you deep psychological insights that can transform your life, and your subscription helps us reach more women who need this healing message. You also notice that you're no longer triggered by your father's behavior in the same way. His criticism doesn't devastate you because you no longer believe it defines your worth. His emotional unavailability doesn't send you into desperate attempts to earn his love because you've learned to love yourself. The ultimate gift of healing from your narcissistic father's psychological legacy isn't just personal freedom. It's the profound realization that you have the power to transform an entire generational lineage. Jung understood that when one person in a family system does deep psychological work, it creates what he called a field effect that influences the entire family constellation, both forward and backward through time. This means that your healing doesn't just benefit you. It energetically shifts the patterns that have been passed down through your maternal and paternal lines for potentially generations. You become what Jung termed the one who breaks the chain, transforming inherited trauma into inherited wisdom. The work you do to heal your own wounds becomes a gift to your ancestors who couldn't do this work themselves, and to future generations who won't have to carry these wounds. When you reclaim your authentic feminine power, you're not just healing yourself. You're healing the wounded feminine that has existed in your family line. You're restoring the capacity for emotional intimacy, genuine nurturing, and authentic relationship that may have been lost for generations. You become a bridge between the wounded past and the healed future. Jung called this process the redemption of the ancestors. By consciously working through the psychological patterns that your father inherited and passed on unconsciously, you're essentially doing the inner work that multiple generations couldn't or wouldn't do. You're transforming what he called the ancestral curse into the ancestral blessing. This doesn't mean you become responsible for your father's healing. That remains his own work to do or not do. But it does mean that his wounds no longer live inside you as unconscious patterns that control your life. You've transformed them into conscious wisdom about what love is and isn't, about healthy boundaries, and about the difference between authentic intimacy and emotional manipulation. The ripple effects of this healing are extraordinary. You might find that your relationship with your father shifts, even if he never acknowledges his behavior or apologizes. Because you're no longer unconsciously hooked into the dynamic, he may soften or become less reactive around you. Or you may find that you can maintain a relationship with clear boundaries. Or you may choose to limit contact without guilt or resentment. Your healing becomes a template for other women in your life who are struggling with similar patterns. Without preaching or trying to fix anyone, your simple presence as a healed woman gives others permission to begin their own healing journey. You become what Jung called a wounded healer, someone who transforms their own wounds into wisdom that can serve others. Perhaps most beautifully, you develop what Jung termed generative love, the capacity to love and nurture in ways that create life and possibility rather than dependence and dysfunction. Whether you have children, mentor younger women, or simply show up authentically in your relationships, you're modeling what healthy feminine power looks like. Your story doesn't end with your father's wounds. It ends with your triumph over them and the legacy of healing you leave for others to follow.